get someone to keep an eye on that. Now, I'm always really excited to have these morning pep talks to give us a boost of energy, to think about something new and to actively work out how we can work together to make change in the world. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Natasha Malani. I'm the CEO of South Australian Leaders. I would like to just start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land at which we meet today, or most of us are on Kaurna land. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional ancestors of the land in which we meet today, so and pay our respects to elders past and present. I'd like to welcome our panelists today. Now, I do have an apology from Natasha Stott-Despoja, who unfortunately is unwell with COVID. So she won't be joining us today. The COVID bug has got her, but equally excited to welcome Mary Patetsis and Tanya Hosch. Now, we did send out the bios of our two panelists in the invitation, and I'm going to touch on their backgrounds briefly before I introduce them. I also would like to welcome Anjani Amrit, who is my co-presenter here today. And Anjani and I do some work together in the women's empowerment space. We're both particularly passionate about that. So thank you and welcome, Anjani. And I also welcome the Minderoo Foundation, who have joined us today, who are a partner in this forum that we're running. So welcome, Heba. Thank you for joining us. I know Natasha Stott-Despoja is very disappointed that she can't be here. And what we've done actually is we've referenced some of her quotes. So we're going to share some of them with you later so that we can feel her energy and presence on this webinar. I'm going to ask you all, if you haven't already, to just mute your microphones. I'm just going to start with talking a bit about Mary Patetsis. So Mary Patetsis is, I'm absolutely honoured and thrilled that Mary is on the advisory board of South Australian Leaders. South Australian Leaders is the organisation of which I'm the CEO, and we put a support structure around business owners and CEOs who are running businesses, SME businesses here in South Australia. And Mary is on the advisory board of SA Leaders, and she's such a strength. Every time I meet and have coffee with Mary, I learn something new. Mary is, I'm going to say, the professional board director. Mary, you wear many different hats on a number of different boards across a range of industries that I think have all been COVID impacted: health, aged care, education, and I think you've had, some experience in dealing with all different iterations of COVID over the past 2 years in those sectors. And I would say you're probably the person I would go to when it comes to all things governance. So appreciate your being here today. Tanya, I don't even know where to start in introducing you in terms of your experience in policy, advocacy, governance. I've seen you speak at Zara Foundation events before, which I'm the chair of, and you're a real inspiration, and your profile is in the invitation today. But amongst your portfolios, they include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues, gender equality, sexuality and gender diversity, racism and sexism, and you're tasked with implementation of the AFL's enhanced Indigenous strategy, advising the AFL. I look forward to hear from you a bit more in just a minute. So we're going to get started. If you've got any questions, now for those of you that don't know how Zoom works, there's a chat box, and if you click on that and pop your questions in the chat, we are going to have a Q&A, very interactive session today. So I urge you to think about the question you'd like to ask our panelists, and we will go through those questions. So this is informal. We want you to learn something today. We want you to learn something practical. We want you to ask your questions. And our two panelists, Mary and Tanya, will be delighted to answer your questions. I'm going to start by giving our panelists 3 minutes each to share an insight, and I'm going to give them a specific question. 3 to 4 minutes we've got for each of our panelists. And the question we've asked them is to share one practical way in which you are transforming the mainstream when it comes to gender equality. I'm going to hand over to you now, Mary, to share your insight.
Just one, you reckon? Look, thank you
all.
At
least one.
At least one. All for taking the time to join us today. And not only am I doing some work in the areas that Natasha described, but I'm also a proud member of an organisation of women called Women for Progress, and it's been put together, chaired by Nicola Forrest, and the idea of that group of women, which has a range of members, and if you Google, you'll find, I think we can give you some links to that if you're interested, is that women need some key things to happen in order for their full participation, and in summary is free access to accessible and appropriate childcare that's affordable, leadership positions, freedom from violence, and in the flip side of that, safety, and equal pay for equal work. So that's the sorts of things that, well, the 4 things that we're putting to government. What do I think matters? I think I'm a woman. I'm the child of migrants, and I'm the first to university. The key for me is that when a door opens for me, I leave it open for others, and I actively find talent, and I make sure that people, in particular women, are given access to power and leadership positions as much as possible to fulfill their entire capability. I mean, it's as simple as that for me. I know that if someone didn't hold the door open for me, I wouldn't have been let through. The truth of it is that unless there is someone there inviting you in, it's very hard. That networking, the old schoolboy stuff, all that is very real. So in some ways, we've got to create our own version of that. That's all about merit and capacity. So from my perspective, it is about giving people opportunities to reach their full potential. And I remember very clearly appointing a CEO, first-time CEO, and that person said to me, "But I've never been a CEO before." And I said, "Don't worry about that. I'll make sure you are at the end. By the time you finish this job, you will be." And the truth of it is that we need to unleash our full capacity, and Australia needs us all to be engaged. So if I have one message to send out is, if you get through to something, bring others with you. Is that 3 minutes, or have I undercut it? I don't even know.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much, Mary. And I love the practicality of that insight. So thank you. Tanya, I'm going to ask you to share.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you. Particularly good for me to be in a panel with Mary, and thanks for the invitation. I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where we're all coming from. I'm on Gunner country. I assume the majority of you are too. Yeah, look, in thinking about this and having a briefing ahead of time, Natasha was very clear that she wanted us to try and give a practical example of something that we're doing to help, positive transformation when it comes to women's equity and inclusion in general. So, my day job is with the Australian Football League. There's many and varied things I do there where, basically I'm employed as a professional disruptor. I've got to try and disrupt the environment if the change is going to happen and if it's going to stick. Now, like I'm sure all of us, COVID had a massive impact on sport, particularly contact sport, particularly a national game where we've got to try and get teams all around the country to keep the game going. It nearly brought, you know, professional sport to its knees. So very, very difficult couple of years. Now, I definitely was able to get some things done in that time. We stood down 80% of our workforce in COVID, 80%. So it was tough. And we, you know, you really had to pick your targets in that time. And in a job like mine, it would have been really easy to not see it as core business in that moment where it was all about getting footy back. But what I learned through that period was that there are times where you do have to cool your jets a bit in terms of trying to progress specific change. And so my practical response to that, I'm apologetic, but my answer is very similar to Mary's, was and still is to actively support and promote other women. And that's had an incredible impact. I think because in COVID, I feel like it's something I've always done. I didn't feel like it was a new thing, but I brought a new emphasis to it, and I brought a more strategic lens to it. Instead of just sort of broadly being supportive, I looked for people, that women who I could see were struggling for air, who I could see their voice wasn't getting listened to, or they were, you know, being crowded out. One of the things we did find, we got some feedback. We'd done so much work in the years preceding COVID around increasing the number of women working in football, and there is about 40% now. And when we went on to online meetings, we found that for a lot of women, it was much harder to be heard. And so some of the things that had been in place before did come back to the table in the online environment for a period of time. But that did help me to reach out to women, and the impact and the fruit from that, I'm seeing it every day. And one of the things that's really lovely that happened recently, I was at the AFLW Grand Final at Adelaide Oval, and one of the great women in our business had got a promotion to go and work at a football club, and she made a passing comment. It was the last time I was going to see her, and she said, "It just has always been so comforting to know that I could always come to you, because everyone knows that you support other women." And I think it's a small thing to do in many respects, but it's a gift that literally does keep on giving.
Thank you, Tanya. And I think that is very practical. I mean, you can't get more practical than that insight. I've just Anjani and I wanted to respect the work that Natasha Stop-Despoja has also done and continues to do in this space. And we just found a quote, and it relates to, I guess, her role in politics in the context. And her insight is, I found some people in politics are still naive to the benefits of investing in women and girls around the world in order to bring about safety, security, as well as a more productive and peaceful world. Sometimes highlighting the economic benefits of getting women and girls into education and employment seems to be the one that legislators and leaders will listen to. So, and I guess that's what we're talking about today, how we influence change, how we change the mainstream, And Anjani, if I could just now hand to you, I'd love to get your insight, as well as summarising the key points that Mary and Tanya have made. And I'm going to also encourage you all to put your questions in the chat box. So we'll go to some Q&A.
Thanks, Natasha. So for those of you who don't know me or haven't heard of me, I'm a conscious leadership expert and women's empowerment advocate and reformed corporate lawyer. So I was a corporate lawyer for a good 16 years, working in the top law firms in UK and Australia. And I'm now happily reformed as a socialpreneur. So that's the intro to me. And I love the insights that were shared by both Mary and Tanya today. So from Mary, what I got was, when the door opens for us, we need to leave it open for others, and then also help others, help other women step through that door. And I think that's also an important part of the message. It's not just opening the door, it's then holding their hand where we need to help them step through that doorway, because it can be quite challenging, it can be quite scary for women, particularly in positions of power, and ensuring women are giving access to power and leadership positions. And she talked about Women for Progress, which is an amazing movement. I've joined and I'm so excited to be part of it as well. And so I highly recommend you go to the link and have a look at that. And from Tanya, very similar messages, that even with change, I think for Tanya, having that change and experiencing that change through COVID has helped you come to this changing the mainstream in a way that's more progressive and more strategic, with a new emphasis on, I can just sit back and play my part. There's no urgency, there's no need to force it. And that's the old way of doing it, that's the old school way of doing it, is force and push. But we can just come together and do what we can, and really promote other women that are around us, that we see are struggling, or maybe, as you said, struggling for air or being crowded out, then just gently give them a hand. And so I love both of those insights, so powerful and so very matriarchal in their approach, which is what I love. My insight, I would say that where I like to focus is on the internal, like how can we change our internal environment, our own self, so that we're actually changing the mainstream by becoming a good role model for what we're wanting to see in the world. And so for that, I talk about the internal dynamics, and how am I coming to this subject of gender equality? What am I bringing to it? Am I bringing, grudges? Do I begrudge our history as women, having to fight for the vote and having to, struggle to get into corporate? Do I bring a grudge with me? And if I do, then I need to clean that up, because I don't want to be bringing that energy and that feeling with me. Am I in hatred or separation and judgment? And often we'll think, well, no, I'm not, but it can act out very subtly. How is that playing out in my home? Because if we can't have peace in the home, if we've got separation in the home, in our relationships at home, how can we expect it outside of us? So my insight is looking internally at myself and my life and my relationships, and what am I bringing to the table, and how am I role modeling what I'm wanting to see in the world? Am I promoting myself as a woman? And if I am, then I'm much more able to promote other women from that point of view.
Thank you, Anthony. What I also love about this conversation is the vulnerability. And that's really there's an opportunity for us all to be vulnerable and to ask ourselves some of these questions about how we can support others, and think about where some of our own barriers may be, or some of our own sort of saboteurs in our own mind, ask where we can ask ourselves some questions. I think that vulnerability piece and that honesty, transparency piece is what I'm personally gaining out of this conversation. Now, I'm going to ask you for some questions. I've got a question here for our panelists. But before I do that, I am just going to jump to you, Heba, Heba, I just would like you to share a little bit about the Minderoo Foundation, and in particular the role of the foundation and the petition that you are running at the moment.
Morning. So as Mary touched on earlier, the Minderoo Foundation is co-chaired by Nicola Forrest. Minderoo Foundation works across a variety of different policy areas, but one of the key areas that's a focus in the next few months especially is the Women for Progress group as part of the Thrive by 5 campaign for early childhood education reform. The Women for Progress group is a group of high-profile Australian women from diverse backgrounds who've come together with one message but many voices, calling for real action from all political parties to build a safer and fairer Australia for women and children with a sustainable economy where the full value of women's contributions and opportunities for girls can be realised. A key part of the Women for Progress group at the moment is a petition calling for all political parties to act on 10 policies. You can read more about the specific policies, but it's about increasing women's safety, financial opportunities, leadership opportunities, and as well as eliminating the gender pay gap and the long-term financial and economic opportunities that we're creating for women and girls. And it's really exciting to have a group of powerful women such as yourself keen to amplify the message of this campaign. We've created a resources page as well to make sharing the petition and its message easier, and hopefully we can amplify each other's voices and get some real action and some real change happening. So I'll just pop into the chat box for you a couple of links to the petition as well as the resources page. And yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to share the message with you, and hopefully we can continue to amplify each other's voices and keep raising the call for real change. Thank you.
Thank you, Heba, and those links are in the chat box for everyone. I also would like to acknowledge we do have some men in this chat today, which I think is just brilliant and fantastic, and appreciate their contribution as well. Mary, I'm going to ask a question about to you about what's the biggest barrier that you faced either personally or in your professional capacity when it comes to changing gender equality in business? And then I'm going to go to Melissa Dunbar's question.
Yeah, look, I think the biggest challenge remains our own perception of what we're capable of. So it took me a long time to be comfortable to exercise, and I saw something in the chat. I've lost track because I can't. About power and the use of authority and influence, and our willingness to engage in assertiveness that is positive, and a belief that we are legitimately around the table. I mean, I really struggle when women in particular talk to me about feeling like they're imposters around the table, and I just think we have we've got to deal with our internal settings on that stuff, and I place responsibility on each and every one of us to seek the supports that we need to get through that process and get to the other end of that. Where self-doubt is always going to be there, but not to the point where it cripples. And I think it's still there. Women are often still don't have sufficient belief in self, and we need that in order to engage fully. And we need that as humans. We need that. And so that's what I think remains the biggest challenge. I think the other thing too is to not be frightened to exercise authority. I mean, you know, leadership comes with responsibility, and you can't just sit back and not be entirely a leader. You have to be a full leader. You can't just sit on the sidelines. You can redefine what that is to be broader than our previous understanding of it. But leadership is what's required. It doesn't need to be bad leadership. So just believe that you are totally capable of doing it, and you will do it. And I can't tell you the number of women that come to me after a meeting and say, "Oh, look, I didn't have the confidence to say that." And I just think, you know, okay, let's work through why. and get to the other side of that. But bizarre way of answering that question, but it's one I reflect on a fair bit.
I completely
Thank
agree
you.
with you, Mary. It's one of the main challenges for women in business, in politics, is overcoming our own self-sabotage and our own unconscious bias. So thank you for sharing that. I just wanted to echo what you said. It makes total sense to me.
I concur. Tanya, there's a question in the chat box that talks about the word power in various expressions around this topic. Is there something wrong with the word power? Does it present a confrontation or friction where we want to simply end up with real equality?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I don't think there is anything wrong with it. I think it's a really appropriate word, in that, you know, there are power dynamics that impact what goes on, how decisions are made, who is heard. You know, as an Indigenous woman, I often, you know, want to have conversations about, you know, let's not have another conversation about reconciliation. Let's have a conversation about white class privilege, and a lot of the power dynamics that are embedded within that. I think there's no question that there will be a number of people who find a conversation about power challenging, and I've also come to believe that it's very difficult to have some conversations for people that, you know, for a whole range of reasons, have the power and have the privilege of living pretty unexamined lives. And so they don't have to do a lot of self-reflection, and therefore, you know, bowling up a conversation about power dynamics might be, you know, something you want to pick your time on, and you might want to build up to it depending on the context and the environment generally. But I do think, you know, there are definitely power dynamics at play all the time. And I think it's important to be able to read the play. But I'm also conscious of what, you know, Mary was just saying, you don't want to be jumping at shadows. So I think there are ways to think about how do you use your agency to reinforce those power dynamics, particularly if they're not power dynamics that are being used for the greater good. So I definitely, I think it's important to be astute about power dynamics. There are times where you will have power, and I think in thinking about how you use yours, and how judiciously, how generously, how inclusively, I think there's actually very little more powerful than modelling the behaviour that you want to see in others, even though that sometimes that can challenge you to have to do that. But I always think it's best to, you know, live up to your standards than to work down to somebody else's. But power is alive and well in a whole range of ways. And, you know, let's not kid ourselves, you know, women with power can also use that against other women as well. And so, you know, the culture of the environment that you're operating in is important, but having an astuteness about power, knowing how to disrupt it when, and ways to even just have that conversation quite openly is critically important.
If
We
I can
need to
just
stop using the word.
if I can just jump, I totally agree. I mean, I think what this planet needs is really good people, and women need to be amongst those. In fact, when I met as a 20-something-year-old, I met a woman who was eventually going to be a mentor of mine. And when I was pregnant, she says, "Are you having a boy or girl?" And I said, "Oh, you know," and she said, "I think feminists should have sons." And I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's really humanity we need to lift, and we need to be able to engage in that exercise fully, and not not introduce gender and culture wars, which we've had for centuries. So I'm pro-human, if that makes sense, and that includes women. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, and it seems the obvious thing to say, but sometimes it's like when I work with migrants or refugees. I keep on saying, we can talk about all sorts of stuff for days and days and days, but if people can't communicate, if they don't have an interpreter, the rest of it's all rubbish. I mean, we can't even get the interpreter box ticked. So I often say the obvious, because it's the obvious we can't nail.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. It's such an important point. And I do want to just share Heba's comment. She talks about power over is the form of power most often used in leadership at the moment, but power with is an alternative way of viewing power that women leaders can model with collaboration, sharing power and lifting up with others. It's so important. It's what's your definition of power, right, Heba? It's, do we have power over, or is the power internalized? Am I exercising my autonomic power? Am I self-driven and self-regulated? And so there are many ways in which we can look at power. So thank you for that, Heba.
Yeah, I think it's a great conversation, and Anjani, I think that's almost your daily conversation. So thank you for sharing that. Mary, there's a question from Tanya Jolly, who is a great entrepreneur in South Australia, who asked, how do you suggest we go about finding women who hold the doors open for us to help solve problems that she is working on as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I saw that. Look, I think it's a really good question, and I've been thinking about it for a second. I think the first thing we need to, across the government, across the country, and especially in South Australia, we need to recognise one thing: the biggest business in town is government. So, as an entrepreneur, I would seriously look at engaging with government and influencing government in a huge way. And I think we've got some opportunities, because there are increasingly numbers of women in positions, ministerial positions and advisory positions, that I think are key. I've never been a public servant, so I'm not suggesting that government has all the answers. What I'm saying is that government's a big player in town. So I think entrepreneurship needs to be front and centre of what our governments are happy to facilitate and invest in. Secondly, is that I think women are entrepreneurs in all sorts of ways, and I think that gaining access. I mean, some of the biggest door openers for me have actually been male entrepreneurs who see talent in me, which I did not see. So, I network. I mean, I'm not networking as much now because I'm kind of network exhausted, but I mean, I have unashamedly networked. So use your contacts, use your networks, talk to powerful men, only because they're already there, and they will see talent in you. And don't be afraid to put yourself forward and your ideas forward. I think the other thing too is we need to work together. Contact. I mean, SSA Leaders, I found as an advisory board member, a really fantastic avenue through which you can safely communicate as an entrepreneur. So go find like-minded people and join in a safe place where you can test your skills at networking and everything else. I think if you're an entrepreneur, the worst thing you can do is spend too much time alone. Unfortunately, give yourself downtime, but spend a lot of time in the world. Yeah, so I don't know whether that answers the question. I never have one simple answer. It's never one thing, unfortunately. But yeah, go. Entrepreneurship is about. I mean, the very fact that you describe yourself like that basically is a big tick. So go for it.
Brilliant. That's great advice. Thank you. Tanya, there's a question in the chat I'm going to pose to you, and it's segueing on from what Mary just said. How do we practically engage with male leaders and peers to support women?
Well, I'm literally surrounded by men on a daily basis in my job, so I don't have to really think about that too much. But I do think it is, again, bouncing from what Mary has just said, is just, building the relationships. One of the things that pieces of advice I got when I was quite new at the AFL was just keep asking for things. And that has been really useful. And I'm not particularly bashful. I'm reasonably assertive. Some might say blunt even. I'm okay with that. But I think it is important to ask for what you want. And so if you have a need to sort of, there'll be any number of opportunities where discussions lend themselves to inclusion. And, we've gone through an incredible period in Australia's history around the role of women in society that is lending itself to these conversations coming up. And they're exactly the moment to speak to male colleagues or even competitors and say, well, how about we have another conversation about how you can help me with some of what I'm needing, or what can I teach you to be a better ally. I think we all know that when it comes to mentoring, it works the best when it's a mutual exchange where there's a recognition of the two-way nature of that relationship. And so I'm always looking for opportunities to where I approach men for support to make sure that they know that I'm very pleased and willing to offer them some insights as well that they might find useful. So I think, you want to use the relationships you have to ask for what it is that you need. And sometimes that's just going to be more opportunity to be in places. I mean, I've certainly said to male colleagues, I notice you get invited to a lot of things that I'd like to be at. How about you take me to some of those and have me sit at the table with you? Do you realise the message that sends when that happens? So I think it's important to ask what you want. I also think it's important to try and make that a mutually respectful exchange, two-way.
Love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sonia. So we're going
just-
to...
Yeah, sorry, it's just coming to time. I know there is one question from Augusta in the chat box that maybe Mary, you could just pop in and have a chat about MBA and the role of AICD courses that in terms of progressing leadership. Anjani, I'll just hand over to you now to sum up.
Yeah, so thank you so much to everyone. Thank you very much to Mary and Tanya. Thank you to Women for Progress. If you haven't got on and signed the petition, I really recommend that you do. And we're just about to launch a poll now. So if Julie, if you can launch the poll, we'd love, it's just 2 short questions on there. We'd love your feedback. Natasha and I would love to bring more of these conversations and have lots more of these conversations. And so if you could help us with that, if you are interested in having these conversations and what you got from today, that would be wonderful. Always you can contact either Natasha or myself or any of the women or any of the men on here. That's another way of networking. And, these talks are about helping us come together, have important conversations, share stories and network with each other. So want to say thank you so much to Natasha for hosting this as well through SA Leaders, and to Heba and everything that you're doing. And we'll look forward to seeing you the next time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anjani. Thank you again to our panelists. And we'll keep the chat box and the questions up for a little while. We are mindful that we did say it was a 9:30 finish, so we'll stick to that. And I'm sure Mary and Tanya, if you can stick around and have a chat in the chat box, that will be great. And thanks, everyone. There were some great insights in the chat box too.
Well, have a good day.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank Thank you, Huber, for popping that link in again. That's great.
Thank you for having me. See you next time.
Thanks, Tash. Good to see you. Thanks, Anthony.
A pleasure. It's great to have
Great
you.
to see you, Kate.
It's been a
So
while.
nice to see you. It has been too long.
Yeah, congratulations. Awesome work. I'll catch you next time I'm in Adelaide.
And just so you know, Anthony, Kate's currently in Samoa.
I know Kate and I are we're connected.
Oh,
Yeah.
good.
And Kate,
Yeah.
I'm going to take your message and send it to both Mary and Tanya, if that's okay with you, because I'd love to get that. It's a
Yeah,
good point
perfect. Thank
made.
you.
So yes.
Yeah, that would be great.
Anyone-
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no problem. And anyone
Natasha,
else who has questions, feel free.
No, awesome. Can't wait for the next one.
Natasha,
Bye.
Natasha,
Yes, Kate.
it's Mary.
Yes, Mary. Hello, Mary.
Hi.
Jules, can you just stop recording? Sorry. Thanks. Hello, Mary.